So welcome all of you, and thanks for coming to our fourth and final fall semester series this year. The Center for Dominican Studies is always thrilled every year to host these, and especially with the help of our wonderful faculty. So I'm going to open us with a prayer, and I found this prayer in, by the way, Sister Diane texted this morning to also extend her welcome. She's very busy, having a wonderful time in New York City right now. But I found this prayer in this book that Sister Diane gave me before she left. It's 600 blessings and prayers from around the world. And this prayer just kind of struck me as speaking to what we're all involved in pretty much every day. So we pray, creating God, we give you thanks for the inventiveness of the human mind, which explores the far boundaries of knowledge and makes connections and proposes theories to add to the quantity and quality of life. We thank you for the thirst for information, which makes learning pleasure and discovery delight, which draws us beyond the familiar and the known to the very edge of understanding. We thank you for the skill of mind and hand, which originated computer technology, that smooths and speeds our way through the many tasks of our lives and gives us access to immense stores of information and immediate communication. But information is not the same as knowledge, nor is knowledge the same as wisdom. Forgive us the folly and greed for power which hook us into a web of overwork and mesh us in an exclusive community which divides the powerful from the powerless. Show us how to find ways of sharing knowledge and opening ideas to one another, so that the superhighway is also a way of justice, peaceful communication, and search for truth. And teach us the difference between a web of information, a body of knowledge, and a God of wisdom and truth. In God's name we pray. Amen. Amen. Rather than give you a bio for these people up here who are very familiar to you anyway, I will ask them to introduce themselves before they begin this presentation. I believe each of them is going to kind of speak for 10 minutes or so, and then we'll have plenty of time for discussion, questions, and the like. So everybody knows here we have Natalie Kompa, we have Tony DeGenaro, we have Anjel Stough-Hunter, and we have Matt Ponesse. So I'll just hand it over to you. Thanks.
All right, can you hear me? Yes? Okay. We're trying this new thing where we sit and we talk, and so we're kind of having this conversation. But what we hope we have is an opportunity to share some perspectives on truth and some of the work that we care passionately about, as well as all of you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the truth about Generation Z. They've been with us now for a number of years. They're sitting in our classrooms, they're entering our workplaces, and I really got interested in Generation Z when I was doing my dissertation. So my research focus has become centered around leadership communication, leadership in general, and Generation Z. So I'm going to share just a little bit of what I have learned about this newest generation. And I also teach the PR and Marketing Communications classes here at ODU and direct the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. So I have lots of chances to interact with our students. All right, so when we define Gen Z, if you pull back and you look at what makes this generation so special, maybe a little bit different. They are typically characterized as being born between 1995 and 2010. You can argue those dates a little bit. Those dates are in sync with what the Pew Research Center says is the beginning of the generation, and we always argue about when is the end of a generation, because we don't always know until we look backwards. So we're still looking forwards. They've had access to technology their entire life. They're tech savvy, they're incredibly connected, they're culturally aware. If you think about the Gen Zs that you know and interact with, they're very aware of what's happening in the broader culture. They're independent thinkers. They're not afraid to speak truth to power, and they seek authenticity. They want authentic experiences. So I'm going to take you through that a little bit deeper. I have a chart here that's incredibly hard to see, but you can imagine that there are some significant differences between millennials and Gen Z. I didn't necessarily believe it when I first started my research. I thought maybe these were just millennials 2.0, that this generation that had started to enter the classroom really wasn't that different, but like any good researcher, I got curious. And so you can see some of the differences. Millennials always believe themselves to be very tech savvy. Gen Z, they think they're tech savants, and they might be. Millennials love to be collaborative. I remember how easy it was to get my millennials working in groups and teams, and they really crave that. Gen Z, they're a little more pragmatic, a little more cautious. I'll take you through what that means from a classroom perspective here in just a few minutes. And you can see some of these other pieces and parts. Millennials used to share everything. They had their locations on. Gen Z, I might keep my locations on for you, but for you, they're going to go off. So they share a little bit more judiciously. So let's take a look at a few more details. One of the characteristics of Gen Z, I call them the sober generation. They're optimistic and driven, but they're also painfully aware of forces beyond their control. They're ethnically diverse. They are savers, not spenders. I think that's an important one for all of us when we think about how do we talk to students about the value of higher education. Much of this is a reflection of growing up in a post-9/11, post-Great Recession, post-pandemic environment that has very much shaped the way they think about the world and think about work. It was interesting. I met with 2 prospective students today, so it was super fun day. But they both very much were honed in on the value proposition as well as not wanting to go heavily in debt. So I thought that was very in sync with what I'm presenting today. They reject religious labels, but they embrace spirituality. And they drink on average 20% less than millennials. So if you're in the beer industry, I guess that's a problem. When you think about technology savants, they have abandoned TV and desktop computers. They might tolerate a laptop. They'd much rather do everything on this. So handheld devices, sometimes they are operating across as many as 5 screens at once. They have an 8-second attention span. Sorry. Think TikTok, think Snapchat. We see it happening. Social circles are global. Many of the Gen Zs will characterize their very best friends as being somebody that they've never even met in person. Gen Z, they like to speak in ways that might sometimes feel confusing. Emoticons and emojis, I think I've mastered that. Slang, not so much. I like to throw out some slang Gen Z terms to the Gen Zer who lives in our house, and she just gives me the look. But I'll say things like, what do you think of my fit? My outfit. I'm in my Gen Z era, if anybody's heard that. Let's get a vibe check. And I get the, Mom, are you for real? So they have their own language, and they like to use those terms, especially with each other. They like rapid fire banter and commentary. They get very impatient when the rest of the world lags behind. That is true for connectivity as well. They're less optimistic than millennials in some respects. I think they have watched what's happening in the broader world. They're very concerned about the world at large, the environment, the wars that they have lived through and now continue to experience. They're more altruistic and outgoing in many ways. They show up in very personal ways and don't mind expressing their individuality. 60% of Gen Z say they want to change the world for the better. When it comes to racial, sexual, gender equality, they believe in diversity, non-discrimination, the alleviation of poverty. These are all issues that are very important to them. They don't understand why same-sex marriage or gender fluidity would even be controversial. And they believe that an organization needs to have a DEI mission. That's a non-starter if you don't. It's not a nice to have, it's a must-have. We've heard a lot about Gen Z and mental health. Twice as many Gen Zs compared to previous generations are likely to battle depression or have feelings of hopelessness. They're 3 times as likely to feel like suicide is a better option than dealing with their struggles. And 1 in 5 knows someone who has died by suicide. So mental health is an incredible issue that Gen Z continues to face. So these are some characteristics. Now, how do we really take what we do, push it through the lens of Gen Z, and hopefully produce meaningful experiences and learning opportunities for our students? So when you think about Gen Z wants to reshape the world, one of the things they want to do is reshape work. They are thrilled by this idea of hybrid or remote work, and they want to work in non-traditional ways, or at least less than non-traditional ways. So I think we have to really think about how we're talking about work and what that could look like. Culturally, they've shifted, so making sure that we are always aware of those diverse examples in our classrooms, our projects, our guest speakers, our illustrations. I think raising that to the top of our awareness is really important. And then environmental consciousness. You know, I think about this a lot, and even within business, should we have a sustainability in business course? What is it that we are doing to really infuse this desire that Gen Z has to change the world into how we are teaching the classes? Collaboration, flexibility, work-life balance, those are all important things to Gen Z. We do a lot of these things at ODU. I think this individual grading or expression is one sometimes I struggle with. Certainly remote work and flexible schedules, very important to Gen Z. We do that with our online courses. Certainly there are challenges. When I talk with other groups or other educators or other business leaders, sometimes I get this, oh, Gen Z is so challenging. Okay, they said that about all of us just at one time. The previous generation was saying how challenging we were. But some of the things that come up are expectations. How do I hold my Gen Zs to the expectation? And I think for us as educators, being very transparent about our grading and certainly our opportunities for growth, because Gen Z does have this very future forward mentality. Hierarchy, they don't much love it. It's not really their thing. So creating those open channels, and I try to think guide on the side, not sage on the stage. How can I show up in that manner? And it seems to get through to Gen Z a little bit better. Feedback. They want feedback. They crave feedback. They want feedback from you. They want feedback from leaders, and they want it to be regular and consistent. In the workplace, they don't want an annual review. They'd rather have a weekly review. They want to know how they're doing. So when you think about what we do best, I think we have hands-on learning, we offer real-world experiences, professional opportunities to the extent that we can infuse that in all of our disciplines. We have those small class sizes which keep those connections personal. I think we have to teach Gen Z how to have difficult conversations. I think they like to tap out, or generationally they have some concerns with how to work through that difficult conversation. So we have to think about how can we model that for our students and really teach Gen Z how to ask for help. I think that's another component of what we can do and how we can help Gen Z really succeed. So in summary, that was a quick trip down Gen Z lane, but we're talking about building that inclusive culture and that diverse representation. They are going to continue to drive technology advancements. They are going to look for solutions to global problems, and I am so happy that they are. So I think we're going to be in for an interesting ride there. And entrepreneurship. Students report 61% would like to own or run their own business at some time in their life. So I think helping each of our students craft their own paths towards success is one way that we can live into their truth and hopefully expand the truth about Gen Z. All right, that is me.
Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. How's it going? Thank you. I'm Tony DeGenaro. I teach English. This is my second year at Ohio Dominican, so I'm particularly grateful to be included on this panel with some excellent colleagues. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your attention. Very easy, very light subject today. What is truth? That's an easy question to answer if you're the Detroit garage rock duo, the White Stripes, who sing over crunchy guitar tones, "Her stare is louder than your voice because the truth doesn't make a noise." It's a miracle I'm not pantomiming the guitar solo that follows those lyrics. Not really any closer to answering our question, what is truth, and does truth make a noise? The idea of truth and rhetorical gestures towards the truth are more complex than ever, given our highly polarizing cultural moment. Take, for example, conversations had around Oprah Winfrey's 2018 Golden Globes acceptance speech, which notably made use of the phrase, "your truth," instead of "the truth." Imagine my delight, an English professor, at syntax and close reading being part of the discourse, if not for just one short moment. An article in The Atlantic fretted that your truth somehow undermines the idea of shared common facts. Journalist Garant's Frankie Ruda observed that sometimes you know something is real and happening and is wrong, even if the world says it's just the way things are. This use of your truth is a call to activism rooted in the individual story and grounded in personal experience. We've heard bad faith rejections on this notion of your truth, coupled with predatory ideologies towards so-called snowflake college students and coddled undergraduates and the like, which distort how we might interpret the rhetorical deployment of your truth on college campuses and in English classes. Buzzwords like fake news seemingly build walls between truth and what syntax we might imagine or understand truth to embody. What is the writing teacher to do? It pains me to admit the White Stripes might have it wrong. Truth makes quite a noise. What an English teacher is to do is to turn to literature. Beauty is truth, truth, beauty. That is all ye know on earth and all ye need to know. John Keats wrote in the final lines of his poem Ode on a Grecian Urn, which is a lovely reflection on the permanence of art, a sort of truth for all the ages. Like the White Stripes, though, the lines of this poem don't answer our question, what is truth, either? If only it were so simple as to stumble upon the answer to this question printed on the side of a building. So I'm absolved of my non-answer, what is truth? We are all here at Ohio Dominican to figure out what truth is, and what's more, to communicate the discovery of that truth with others. Inside that building, I teach English courses mostly to our freshmen, and I believe that using personal narrative, a kind of blur of your truth and the truth, is the most authentic way of fulfilling the promise etched into the stone outside of Erskine Hall. In first-year writing, one of the objectives of the course is to develop the process for print-based communication. Students write papers in most, if not all, of their classes, and will do so in their social and public lives well beyond the university. My objective for this course is to activate in those students the most authentic voice from which they can share the fruits of their contemplation, where they can write truthfully. As Robert J. Nash describes in Liberating Scholarly Writing, to write is to demonstrate with a degree of certainty that we truly matter. Is it too extravagant to say, paraphrasing Descartes, that I write, therefore I exist? I don't think so. To write a personal narrative is to look deeply within ourselves for meaning that might, when done well, resonate with other lives, maybe even inspire them in some significant ways. Personal narrative in English has skeptics not unlike your truth versus the truth does in discourse. It even has skeptics in the classrooms where I teach. I want students to wield narrative truth in their writing in a meaningful and responsible way. I want them to contemplate and to share that contemplation using personal narrative without losing sight of truth, theirs or otherwise. I believe that the path to this is through contemplation, but what is that? Again, I turn to a poet. Thomas Merton calls contemplation many things: the highest expression of man's intellectual and spiritual life, spontaneous awe at the sacredness of life, of being, gratitude for life, for awareness, and for being, a vivid realization of the fact that life and being in us proceeds from an invisible, transcendent, and infinitely abundant source. Nash conceptualizes of personal narrative and scholarly writing similar to gratitude as, quote, all about loving ideas so much that you're willing to play with them, to nurture and care for them, and to continually test and challenge them in the company of others. Merton, himself a scholar moving from college to college before adapting a monastic life at Gethsemane near Bardstown, Kentucky, was himself blessed with the gift of writing, a poet, and he toiled in his younger years, especially over foregoing art and aesthetics for spirituality, including during the writing of The Seeds of Contemplation, where our definition comes from. Fortunately, his reappraisal of the contemplation-art dichotomy eventually arrived at one's gifts do not need to be somehow or another disinfected before contemplation can be a possibility. This is to say that Merton first found it irresponsible to share the fruits of this contemplation, a sentiment perhaps coincidentally captured in a line of one of his poems entitled First Lesson About Man. He writes, whenever he goes to the phone to call joy, he gets the wrong number. He writes that contemplation is always beyond our knowledge, beyond aesthetic intuition, beyond art, and beyond poetry. We can imagine Merton struggling to share his gifts just as we can imagine our own students struggling to invent themselves, to communicate their thoughts, and to articulate their own ideas as if they were making their own unanswered phone calls. We see Merton defining the concept in similar language to how an enthusiastic writing instructor might describe a new project to students. Contemplation is incompatible with complacency and with smug acceptance of prejudiced opinions. It is not a mere acquiescence in the status quo. As Silent Lamp, the Thomas Merton story illustrates, the monk worked through his hesitations with sharing the gift of writing. In a letter to Pope John Paul XXIII, for example, Merton writes that as a contemplative, I do not need to lock myself into solitude and lose all contact with the rest of the world. Rather, this poor world has a right to a place in my solitude. This perspective recalls composition scholar Thomas Kent's assertion that all writing is public and is situated, Merton's poor world entering his solitude, his writing, just as Merton's writing enters this poor world for us to read and enjoy. Where Nash writes that scholarly personal narrative writing is the unabashed, upfront admission that your own life signifies and has meaning, Merton states that I am a man dedicated entirely to peace and justice and to the rights of man as a writer. If we imagine ourselves as writers, which is very easy for me, and we imagine our students as writers, even easier, this multifaceted approach not only to contemplation, but also to writing and to the self seems so clear. I am reminded of how easily narrative writing fits into the ethos of this university. Similar to my approaches to teaching writing, Nash's scholarly personal narrative can take many different forms. While it is personal, it is also social. I see this as a clear appeal to our pillar of community. While it is practical, it is also theoretical. This appeals to our pillar of study. While it is reflective, it is also public. While it is local, it is also political. This appeals to our pillars of service. While it narrates, it also proposes. While it is self-revealing, it also evokes self-examination from readers. This appeals to our pillar of prayer or contemplation, or however a student imagines themselves fitting within a broader dialectic of the self and the world containing that self. Lastly, to truth and narrative, it is our students who carry some of the onus on defining what these things are to them. In Thomas Newkirk's The Performance of Self in Student Writing, truth is complicated under this guise of performance. He writes that the task for students is not revelation, but construction, to create a self that works, that will be taken seriously. The core of Newkirk's argument is that the notion of a self, while a student might deploy a performed self in personal narrative, that self is a product of contemplation and earnest construction, is authentic all the same, a kind of their truth. Personal narrative, subjective truth, is no less authentic as it is the truth. In freshman composition, I am satisfied with truths being explored at the borders of spirituality, of identity, and students beginning to define themselves in the context of how they might share the fruits of their study, their truth, with others using writing. Merton calls contemplation spiritual wonder, and I can't think of a more beautiful thing than that. Beauty, truth, truth, beauty. I find the thread circling back to our original question: what is truth? It doesn't seem to me crucial to have an answer this afternoon so much as it seems necessary that we keep thinking about what truth is, how we can teach in a manner that compels students, regardless of how they invent themselves, to write with curiosity, with honesty, as their narratives formulate some kind of authentic truth, and for us to take these selves seriously. What is truth is a question we should be less concerned with answering and more concerned with contemplating. Thank you.
Hello. I loved how I was listed on the bulletin as former professor, and I don't know why, but it made me feel like I had died, but I am not. I am actually still here, and I'm happy to be back with you today. I, in fact, attempted to get out of this, and Sister Diane was like, no, I think you'll be fine. So here we are. For me, truth is one of our hardest of the core themes that we talk about at Ohio Dominican. Community, justice, those are in my wheelhouse as a sociologist. But truth is a lot more contested, especially in our discipline. I see a few of my methods students out there. Shout out. Little methods vocab quiz here in the introduction. Sociologists acknowledge debate, maybe, hold in tension, multiple ways of seeking the truth about human behavior in groups and the societies we create. So we use qualitative and quantitative methods. We use induction, deduction, positivism, constructionism. And often I see my students entering my discipline kind of waffling between two ways of seeking truth in sociology. One of the sides is that students often conflate truth with only positivism and empiricism. If we can't obtain the information using a deductive hypothesis testing method, then perhaps we have not arrived at truth. These folks want to see people, their behavior, their thoughts, their emotions to be like rocks, trees, and molecules. On the other side, and often this is literally the other side of the classroom, we have folks who want to elevate the experience. That is often the experience, however, of only one. We lovingly critique this approach as the sociology of one approach. It didn't happen to me, ergo it didn't happen. My sense is that we're really good at teaching our students to move deductively through the scientific method. However, in doing so, we leave students with the impression that science is truth and stories and meaning making are merely opinions to be discarded or marginalized. This is unfortunate. So today I want to take a moment and elevate the careful, thoughtful, and systematic use of story, or perhaps a better term for that, narrative. For it is in the beauty of the story and the diversity of the human experience that we capture our search for truth within academia. There are many ways to think about a story. For the purpose of this presentation, I'm using story to refer to qualitative data and the narrative we collect as social scientists to understand the meaning that people give to phenomenon, as well as the lived experience of individuals and groups. However, stories are embedded in the work of many of my colleagues in English, philosophy, history, public relations, the narratives that we've written in the past and the present to help us make sense of who we are as humans. These stories, too, bring richness to our understanding of human nature, but I will leave that part to them for now. Let me highlight several aspects of qualitative research as it relates to truth. First, we give meaning to the world around us. That meaning often differs depending on our social location. It's difficult with quantitative data only to understand this meaning-making process. Qualitative research, which can take the form of interviews, observations, extensive fieldwork, allows us to answer how and process questions. For example, how do individuals come to adopt an identity? How do students make sense of the role of religion in their college experience? To answer these questions, we need to understand that there are multiple versions of meaning. And when we don't, we miss the possibilities for making conditions that allow all humans to thrive. We miss learning from groups who haven't had a seat at the table or a page in our textbooks. Second, our lived experiences matter. They matter in part because some lived experiences have been elevated and we have been conditioned or socialized to accept a dominant narrative at the expense of other narratives, to hear some voices at the expense of others. Qualitative research allows us to give voice to those who don't have a voice. Third, numbers, though so very important, don't tell the whole story. They leave us in a world that is cold and, as Weber would say, overly rational. We trade predictability, efficiency, and calculability for empathy, beauty, and mystery. Consider the following ways to describe poverty. Here's the first. Rural poverty in Tanzania has been halved in the periods from 1985 to 2001. At present, about 38% of people living in rural areas are classified as poor. That's fine. Here's option 2. Poverty is like living in jail, like living under bondage, waiting to be free. If you want to do something and have no power to do it, that is poverty. For a poor person, everything is terrible. Illness, humiliation, shame. We are cripples. We are afraid of everything. We depend on everyone. No one needs us. We are like garbage that everyone wants to get rid of. Both options are ways of describing poverty, and both are valuable. Both add to our understanding of the truth of poverty. But it is the second that captures the experience and more often compels us to action. Beyond just collecting qualitative data, I wanted to look at the ways in which numbers without stories are also problematic. By assuming that numbers don't capture a narrative is equally, if more, dangerous than missing the story in the first place. We're becoming increasingly dependent on formulas or algorithms to do our work and our thinking. And I must say, I appreciate Amazon's suggestions, Pandora's additions to my playlist, and Kroger's coupons each week. But the danger in these algorithms, and there are many I'm sure, as they relate to narrative, is this assumption that the numbers themselves are not with bias. Kathy O'Neill, in her compelling book, Weapons of Math Destruction, provides example after example to illustrate the ways that algorithms fail, as well as perpetuate and increase inequality. Baked into our big data are the assumptions and biases of our societies, our organizations, and our most powerful and privileged folks at the expense of those who don't have a seat at the quantitative table. Thus, capturing and effectively using stories remains an essential element of our time. As we look to data-driven results and an attempt to measure everything, it's important to pause and realize that our objective conclusions may in fact be flawed. As I've heard Dr. Marazita say, just attaching a number to something does not mean we have a valid and reliable measurement. What does that number mean? To me, I'll editorialize a little bit, this is one of the many reasons that a view of higher ed that attempts to quantify outcomes and make a direct connection between quantifiable outcomes and resource allocation is not just problematic, but frankly a recipe for disaster. As much as we listen to the numbers, let us also listen to the stories. I have a quote from Runner's World that's hung in my office for years, and the quote is, "Knowledge is more than a collection of facts, and running is more than a collection of miles. Somewhere in both lies wisdom." While the authors were telling a story of an academic who found solace in running, that quote reminds me of two things in relation to today's talk. First, the truth about the society we create, the institutions in which we function, the organizations in which we contribute, and the relationships in which we engage are more than a collection of that which is quantifiable. Second, perhaps the truth that I encourage my students to seek looks more similar to the truth that emerges in the quiet contemplation of an early morning run, the truth that comes from sitting with the complexity, a truth that demands the careful telling, listening, and interpreting of the stories that make us human.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. My name is Matt Ponesse. I teach history here at Ohio Dominican. I was very pleased to be asked to participate in this panel. I'm not a huge fan of going last. Normally, sort of history provides the beginning of a discussion, and then, speakers can kind of advance to more modern topics like technology and Gen Z, et cetera. And I'm reluctant to kind of bring you all into the murky mists of the past. Also, it was predetermined that we would be sitting and talking, and this is a format that I am absolutely not comfortable with at all. It doesn't offend me, but I'm a very fidgety and nervous person. I need to walk and roam. So the fact that I'm kind of, stationary is going to be kind of, there's a war within me. I need to kind of, jump up, and I tend to be a little passionate about subjects. And of course, I'm most passionate about the subject of history, and I'm very passionate about what history has to say about the truth. I chose this graphic. I love this graphic. If the news is fake, imagine how bad history is. I love it because of how horribly inaccurate it is when it comes to understanding what history has to offer. Okay, in fact, it kind of represents a very modern misconception about history, that history somehow, what a historian does is we go back, we find documents, and we accept at face value what they say. It's the truth. It happened in the past, it was written down, and we accept it. In fact, I actually had an online argument with an archaeologist. I had posted something on social media, don't ask me why I posted it, but I was talking about an old historian, a 6th century historian named Justinian. He was the emperor, but the historian's name was Procopius. And Procopius wrote a very flattering history of Justinian and his wife as they ruled over the Byzantine Empire in the 6th century. And it was published during the life of the emperor, and the emperor gave his stamp of approval. And as soon as the emperor died, Procopius came out and published what is now known as the secret history, the unofficial history, what he really thought of this particular emperor. And so where is the truth? And I made some sort of amusing statement about this historian, and the archaeologist kind of came at me and said, well, this is exactly why I don't like history. Rocks don't lie. That's what the archaeologist said. Rocks don't lie, history lies. How can we use history at all? Because history, and mostly kind of historical writing, is the product of humans, and humans are deceptive. Humans have agenda. Humans are biased. How can we trust anything that comes down to the present? If the news is fake, if we have trouble with current events, well, how can we even begin to process the information that is thousands and thousands of years old? Well, I think this is a kind of a misconception, as I said. Historians don't approach the past and try to assess, is it fake news? Or is it true? Is it fact? In fact, we even avoid the term fact. I teach Latin here as well, and I don't want to give you a language lesson. The word fact means something that has been done.